Nora Twomey, you are nominated for the Oscar for Best Animated Feature for The Breadwinner, a very beautiful, beautifully animated film. How did you come across this material?
Um, my partners in Cartoon Saloon, Paul Young and Jerry Sharon, had come back from an animation market where they had met Andrew Rosen and Anthony Leo of Aircraft Pictures, which is a Canadian company. And they had the rights to Deborah Ellis's book, this amazing book that was first published in 2000. It's about a young girl growing up in Afghanistan during the Taliban regime, and she cuts her hair, dresses as a boy in order to provide for her family, because her father was arrested, and it was at a time where girls and women weren't allowed out without a male relative with them. So if you didn't have a male relative, you were in serious trouble. So so I read this book in an evening and absolutely loved the character of Parvana, and the way that Deborah writes for young people in particular. I think that in a way that doesn't talk down to them. She at the same time doesn't take anything for granted, and she was able to kind of open up this door into a world and into this amazing character is quite flawed, in ways, and you can hear, in the book, the way that Parwana describes her older sister isn't very complimentary. So there's a kind of a humor to it too, and there's a kind of a matter of fact nature to it. I think it for me, it was the way, I guess, and there's just the truth to it, how we normalize extraordinary circumstances in order to get on with life, to get on with what you have to get on with every day. There's that quality in the way that Deborah writes about Parwana, and that I think that was something that I felt that we could put on the screen, and do justice to the way that Deborah had written this book.
So you said that the book came out in 2000, which is interesting because in the movie, uh, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan is specifically brought up by the end. Was that uh, what made the what led to the decision to set it a little bit further during that pivotal time?
Yeah, this is we had. I guess we were very mindful of everything that had happened since the year 2000, with, NATO entering Afghanistan, with the fall of the Taliban, the rise of ISIS, and the attacks that had happened around the world, and how things have changed in the last decade and a half or more at this point. So I guess we wanted to nod to it in some way, or to kind of acknowledge it in some way. And I think that the way that the film is structured, I guess we wanted to show that there were cycles, that there were cycles of, Afghanistan has always been on the edges of empires. It has always had proxy wars, happening on its soil. It has always, these larger superpowers or empires or kingdoms, have always had an interest in what happens in Afghanistan because of its geographical location, I guess. So we wanted, I suppose, to show we wanted to show that no matter what, there were always families at the center of this. That no matter what was going on in the grander scheme of things, it was always people who suffered and children who suffer. In situations like we see Parwana going through. So I suppose it was all of that we wanted to show that larger history, that larger political history, but in a way to just have it on the outside of the story, and for the inside of the story to be very much this family and this young girl and her love for her father and her wish to see him again.
And I'm curious, what this is sort of a two-parter question. What aspect of the source material and the film you ended up making, or viewing this, what touched you the most? And on the other side of that, what shocked you the most about learning about the culture of Afghanistan during that time?
um I guess if I can just work backwards, I suppose what shocked me, I guess, was how, speaking with as many Afghan people as we did during the creation of this film, hearing how the Taliban initially, were welcomed in certain, spheres because they represented law and order. because they couldn't be bribed, because they represented, something that meant that, if somebody had done something to you, you had somebody to go to try and right the situation, I guess, to some degree, because they were religiously motivated, I guess, rather than, for centuries previous to that, you had, different invading forces where they were using money to try and control, things in Afghanistan, I suppose. So to me, that was a shock hearing um, that they were welcomed to a degree before it became really apparent, how they were going to rule the people. I guess, I suppose that was most shocking. What touched me, I suppose, when we recorded, some of our cast are Afghan, so recording people like Kawa Ada and Shaista Latif and Nooran, some of the amazing cast that we have, just hearing their stories and hearing their connection with the characters that they were playing, or I think that was really, affecting for me, I guess.
So, as I said before, the movie is beautifully animated, and I was wondering what aspects of the story were the most difficult to animate.
Um, Sometimes it's the most subtle things that are the more difficult to animate, when you have a character that's moving through a lot of space and doing lots of actions, and that can be quite easy. But when you're trying to show that a character is thinking, that can be quite difficult, and trying to give away a little bit about what your character is thinking, especially a character like Parvana, who's sitting in the marketplace trying to be invisible in ways. She's trying to inhabit the least amount of space that she possibly can. She's trying to not draw attention to herself, to have a camera on a character like that and then show that they're thinking. And at the end of the day, the fact that they are just a few drawings, on a screen, at 24 frames per second, that's challenging, and that's down to the abilities of every animator. On a film like this, it's a co-production, so we had animators working in Ireland and we had animators working in Luxembourg, a lot of whom never met each other, yet they were carrying one performance. You had two animators who would never meet each other, both animating Parvana. She walks out of this scene and into this scene. How do we make that feel like the same character? And especially when you're presenting it to human beings in the audience, who when something is wrong, you have a sense that something is wrong as an audience member, and you just emotionally disconnect. You don't know why you do, but it just switches you off, basically, or switches off your heart or your empathy. So to try and hold on to that all the way through the film, and to make sure that there's an arc through the film with the characters' performances, especially Parvana, who goes through such a transformation in this film. That was quite difficult. And then with some of the more joyful things to animate, or the things that made a lot, that were a lot more interesting, I think, or were not interesting, but easier, let's say, for animators, were some of the story world scenes where we get to see Parvana's imagination, and both our actors and our animators, I think, had a lot of fun with those characters, because they were allowed to be a lot more free, with their performances.
And was there any challenge presented because of the location of where it's set? Because it's set in Afghanistan, which is a desert country, and that might seem strange for an animated movie, considering so much of it is just bare. Did that present any sort of challenge, or like play with your mind a little bit in terms of how it was depicted?
Yeah, Afghanistan has many different types of, you have beautiful green parts of Afghanistan as well, so it's a very, they're very diverse environments, I guess, within Afghanistan. Kabul itself is at quite an altitude. It has a certain type of light to it. It was, it was extremely difficult because we couldn't travel back in time, I guess, as well. It was set, the film is set at a time where 80% of the city had been destroyed. The photography itself was forbidden at the time as well, so we didn't have a huge amount to go on, I guess, but we did have Afghan people to go on, so hearing the stories that people were telling us about what it was like at the time, and hearing it from many different perspectives, many different ethnic groups within Afghanistan, people who had left the country at different times, people from different religious perspectives, different political perspectives. Hearing all those voices meant that the story that we told was fairly rounded, and had those stories layered, within Parvana's story, I guess, in one sense, but it was quite universal. In another sense, because you ask two Afghan people what is the future of Afghanistan, and you get two different, opinions. Let's say the same as if you ask two different Americans, what the future of their country is. So it in ways there was a freedom with that then, But I mean, the film at the end of the day is a film that just asks questions. It's not about answering questions, or it's not about saying, even this is the way things were. This is an impression of an experience. Deborah's book was written based on the testimony of women who had left Afghanistan into Pakistan, who had fled both the Taliban, or had fled the Russian invasion that had happened before that, or had fled civil war. So we wanted to get a sense that it wasn't particularly about any one conflict. It was about all conflict, and whether that's an Afghan story, or a Syrian story, or it has that kind of broad sphere to it, I guess, as well.
So you mentioned that a lot of the people that were cast in this movie were Afghan, and I'm wondering, these were very unknown names. What was the casting process like to find the people to inhabit these characters?
Yeah, I mean, we cast out of Toronto, actually. So a lot of the people are, the Afghan people that are part of our cast. Either they came as children, or they came as adults, or their parents came to Toronto. So in terms of casting, Merlan Ridley, who was our casting director, put posters up in Afghan markets around Toronto, and it was a really interesting process, I think, because we had entire families come into us, and a lot of the market voices that you hear, are fathers and daughters and sons, and that, all speaking to each other in our recording booth. So I suppose we wanted people who had some kind of a story. Some, parents came from one place, and they found a home in a new city, or who felt that part of their heart belonged someplace else, basically. So I mean, it was really interesting. At the end of the day, we made our decisions based on the characters. We would have images of the characters, and we would listen to the different voice performances of the people who came when we were casting, and made our decisions based on that. For characters like Parvana, Sarah Chowdhury, who plays the voice of Parvana, did an absolutely incredible job at 11 years old, and there's a wisdom and a depth to her performance. I think that's just absolutely incredible. And I knew that when I first heard her voice, that she could carry anyone. She could carry me through the whole film, really, with the spirit that you hear in her voice.
Wow, she's 11. I did not. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And her performance is absolutely fantastic in that movie. So I mean, there's a lot of messages to take away from the movie, and even as you said, the film is more about asking questions than it is providing answers. But we live in a very uncertain and crazy world these days. What message do you hope people would take away from seeing this film?
I suppose I didn't really set out to make a message, and I never really thought about what message. Even all the way through the filmmaking, I think that's dangerous territory as a filmmaker. If you start thinking about a message in your film, the same as with songwriters, I think it gets dangerous if you start if you start trying to transmit something through your work that you could conceive as a message. I wanted to see hope in this film, and again, just going back to Sarah's performance, or the way that Deborah writes about Parvana, or listening to the stories that we got to hear when we were making this film. I guess hope was the one thing that even the act of animating itself, I think, the fact that you can have people coming from, with a film like The Breadwinner, you have people from all different walks of life drawing together to make one performance, for this film. The fact that you have people who can draw, and we can draw characters that become like a living, breathing human being on the screen. For me, that's an extremely hopeful thing, to see so much creativity come together to create one film. That's extremely hopeful. So I guess it's the one word, I guess, that I held on to throughout this entire film, I guess, and that a lot of people, I think, held on to. It's just the idea of hope, because that's what creativity is about,
And it definitely comes across in the movie. It definitely comes across, especially in that final bit. It really does. I don't want to say anything in case, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but it really does come across in that final bit. It just beautifully, and I think it's beautifully illustrated. So just one last question for you. We are an awards site, and your film did get into the Best Animated Feature race at this year's Oscars. What was it like finding out that you had gotten nominated for an Oscar?
Oh, it was really incredible. We've made 3 films in Cartoon Saloon at this point with our different co-production partners, and with this one we have Melusine and Aircraft Pictures. But there was a little bit of a pressure, I have to say, on this film from the earliest days. The word would get mentioned, as though it were it were easy, to get an Oscar nomination. We would really, like, for an independent film, a small budget independent film, a co-production, to have something like an Oscar nomination is incredible. The light that it shines on a film like The Breadwinner, you can't buy, I guess. So to be recognized by your peers as well, and to have our team recognized in this way, is incredible, and we are all extremely delighted with this nomination.
Well, Nora, I can't thank you enough for talking with us. Everyone should go see The Breadwinner. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for talking with us, and best of luck to you on Oscar night.
Thank you very, very much.